Chers auditeurs,
Dear listeners,
bonjour.
welcome in Comdarchipodcast Season 3
Saison 3, dans le monde fascinant des architectes.
and in the architectural projects.
Je suis Anne-Charlotte Depondt, passionnée d'architecture et docteur des universités en histoire de l'archi.
I am one of the spokespersons of Anne-Charlotte, who is a PhD in architecture history.
Merci
Thank you
d'être avec moi aujourd'hui.
to be with us today.
Et
And
maintenant,
now,
lundi en français, place au talent.
and Wednesday, let's talk projects. In English, of course.
Bienvenue dans Comme d'Archi.
Dear listeners, welcome to the 5th episode of our comdarchi summer series on the theme Short Chronicles and Beautiful Castles. This is Esther on behalf of Anne-Charlotte. This episode and the 3 following were written by Anne-Charlotte in the light of existing documentary resources on the Château de Forges, located in Concrémier in the Indre region, France. It is a defensive castle, astonishing, not squat and not austere, which once again belonged to the family of Jean de Poix. Jean de Poix, who, by letter of patent from Charles VII, fortified the hostelry in the 15th century. An exceptional medieval site where it is possible to stay. Because its current owner, Hugues de Poix, a direct descendant, continues to keep the spirit of the place alive with his wife. I wanted to start by expressing a thought to the owners. The idea that a châtelain is rich is so wrong. To maintain these historic masterpieces, the worthy heirs and or owners work like crazy. You should know that. Owning a castle these days is an act of bravery. To own a castle is to assume the role of a respectful and dedicated steward. It means facing up to constructive material that has been tested by time. It means maintaining the walls, developing the uses in a spirit of preservation. And when it is a fortified hotel, to use Christian Trézin's expression, very old like Forges, then the responsibility is all the greater. Today, the hotel retains its feudal character and an incredibly well-preserved and coherent form in its landscape. Overlooking the Anglin River, it stands on a moat. It will probably be part of a line of fortified castles, which protected Berry on its southern edge. It belongs to a group of medium-sized buildings, mainly in the central and central-western regions of France, Berry, Auvergne, Limousin, and Poitou, which were built or rebuilt during the 100 Years' War, and which comprise a quadrangular dwelling fortified with 4 corner towers, sometimes with a stair turret. The Forges castle is described as follows. Its keep is square, flanked at the corners by 4 round towers, and surrounded on 3 sides by walls on which 5 towers with archways are supported, one of which is the dovecote. The enclosure is entered from the south between 2 towers, linked at the top by a parapet walkway overhanging a machicolation. The inner courtyard contains the 4-lobed keep and the guardhouse, which is attached to the south side of the enclosure. To the east are the stables, the cellar, and the castle chapel. The renowned historian Jean-Marie Perros de Monclos tells us about the Château de Forges that, by letters patent of 1442, Jean de Poix, cupbearer, i.e. court official whose function was to serve drinks at the royal table, cupbearer of Charles VII, received from the king the authorization to build this castle. The building, he explains, belongs to a common type of 15th century castle dungeon, proceeding from the castle of Vincennes and announcing that of Chambord. Square keep flanked by round towers, low enclosure. This one, however, is not any more flanked of these high towers, which in Vincennes announced the suzerain. End of quote. There is one nuance, however. At Forges, the dwelling existed before this construction act. Indeed, it is mentioned from the beginning of the 14th century. And the fortification of the castle, authorized in 1442 by letters patent from King Charles VII, granted his cupbearer, Jean de Poix, the license to fortify and rampart his hostel, which therefore pre-existed. The text specifies that the construction was already very advanced and that previously the dwelling was not fortified. The authorization granted to fortify and rampart the said Castle of Forges to dig ditches, to erect walls, towers, palaces, drawbridges and barbicans. Today, the ditches and barbicans have disappeared. Dendrochronology, i.e. the method of dating wood, reveals several phases of a construction that would have been spread over some 30 years. The frame and the dungeon's ur date from around 1447. The ur corresponds to the courtyard or light masonry lining the half timbering. The refurbishment of the old dwelling to the northeast of the courtyard is thought to date from 1453. The years 1464-1466 would correspond to the framing of the southwest tower of the enclosure. Those from 1469 to 1471 to the framework of the dwelling to the south of the courtyard. In the same way, and during the second half of the 15th century, a chapel was built to the northeast of the enclosure, a building to the west of the keep, and an outbuilding to the southeast of the courtyard. The northwest tower of the enclosure was converted into a dovecote in 2 phases. Around 1713, the ur is dismantled and the roof of the keep is lowered. Christian Trézin, in his study Les Urs du Château de Forges, Concrémier-Indre et leur contexte berrichon, reveals that, and I quote, "The active defenses of the building are distributed over the enclosure and the large dwelling. The southern and eastern fronts of the enclosure, which are the most exposed, as well as the entrance, topped by a machicolation path on triple-stepped brackets, are the best equipped with archways or gun ports. The second defensive concentration concerns the large dwelling itself. However, unlike the enclosure, there is only one archway and cannonry on the top floor of the southwest tower. The defense was essentially organized in the upper part for the firing of the fichant shot." End of quote. Namely, a fichant shot is a shot in which the projectile will be embedded in the ground at a very short distance after the target. At the end of the 19th century, the castle was converted into a farm. In the second half of the 20th century, it was refurbished and turned into a residence. The current owners tell the story of the men who lived there, and I quote, "Forges remained in the same family for nearly 3 centuries until Marguerite de Poix, described as Dame de Forges in various compromises. She married Antoine de Lage, Lord of La Palisse, around 1600, and had no descendants. Her sister, Renée de Poix, who inherited the estate, married Pierre de Musard, of whom Claude de Musard, who lived in Forges, had as daughters. Catherine, Lady of Forges, married to Charles de Montmorency, and Gabrielle, Dame de la Roche-Bellusson. Forges was soon sold to the Marquis de Lussac, who sold it to Mathieu Pinsonneau around 1715. The latter, who had become Marquis du Blanc, sold it around 1719 to Marie de la Vieuville, Marquise de Parabère. Ruined by the sumptuous life she led at the regent's court, the Marquise de Parabère was forced to sell her lands, including those at Forges, in 1738 to Claude Dupin, fermier général, seigneur de Chenonceau. He was a king's councillor and lived in Paris, Quai d'Anjou, Ile Saint-Louis. He was the grandfather of Georges Sand. After the death of Claude Dupin, Forges passed into the hands of his grandnephew, Claude de Villeneuve, who sold it to Léon Chézeau, a farmer. Fernand Aubier from Éditions Montaigne bought it from him and restored it to its former glory. Finally, Fernand Aubier's heirs sold it to Viscountess Félix de Poix, the grandmother of the current owner, who represents the 13th degree affiliation since Jean de Poix in Berry, and the 29th since his ancestor in Picardy, Gauthier Tirel de Poix, who accompanied William the Conqueror to England. When reading this history of man, what other proof is there than to see the owner as a transmitter of history? Here, the construction has withstood the test of time. The limestone rubble structure, which gives the building its apparent homogeneity, has no ashlar chains, except for the chapel, the building adjoining the keep, the buildings to the south and northeast of the courtyard, which have ashlar chains. The first floor of the buildings to the east of the courtyard is timber-framed. The chapel is rib-vaulted. The room above the chapel, the basements of the keep, the adjoining building, and the building to the northeast of the courtyard are barrel-vaulted. The basements of the southwest and northeast towers of the keep have domes. The ground floor of the southwestern tower of the enclosure, the second and third floors of the northeastern tower of the keep, and the first floor of the dovecote are covered with polygonal domes. The keep has a pavilion roof. The towers have conical roofs, except for the 2 towers of the enclosure, which are massed lean-to roofs. The buildings to the south and north of the courtyard have long-sloped roofs with covered gables. The chapel has a long gable roof with open gables. The building adjoining the keep has a lean-to roof. Finally, the stair tower of the southern building is covered with a round-hipped roof. The access to the basement of the keep and to the floors of the northeast tower of the enclosure is via straight staircases. More generally, we still admire the castle's homogeneity, even if the studies show that its appearance has changed significantly with the lowering of the towers, the removal of the hoardings, and the replacement of structural parts. So, we are not inventing anything, even less do we reinvent. But, symbolically, we have a lot to learn from these masterpieces of durability about respect, transmission, the constructive phenomenon. It is not surprising that at the time of Charles VII in Berry, where the king had set up his court in Bourges, close to the great treasurer of the Kingdom of France, Jacques Coeur, such a castle was built. At a time when the Kingdom of France was slowly moving towards its hexagonal shape, at a time when castles were soon seeing their ramparts lowered, as they had become useless due to the formidable efficiency of metal cannonballs. We hope that the contemporary cannons will not catch up with us today, and if you wish to stay at the chateau, do not hesitate to consult the site chateaudeforges.fr. Dear listeners, thank you for tuning in. Let's meet again next week for a new Summer Comdarchi in English. And until then, take care of yourselves. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening. Thanks to Julien Rebours, sound engineer, who is collaborating with us today. Don't forget to tune in to our previews on Instagram at comdarchipodcast. If you enjoy this podcast, don't hesitate to promote it by giving it 5 stars and a little comment on Apple Podcast or on your favorite podcast platform. And above all, subscribe to listen to all of our episodes for free. See you soon, and until then, take care of yourself.